diverse people are who work in sports, the better. And that's why I think as social workers, you're going to bring that diversity. I was always a part of teams at the NBA and at the collegiate level. I was at the University of North Carolina and I was at Michigan State and the University of Houston. Is that always being on a team or supervising a team of people that had different talents. Whether it be, I always worked with former players, worked with folks who had counseling degrees like I did, I've worked with coaches, and so together you need diversity also, not only in your skill set, but with the team of people that you work with. So I think that's really, really important. Part of my transition into my consulting business now is because after 30 years in this business at the college and professional and high school level, I see all the holes. So I know like what's missing. And what I'm looking to do, or what I am doing in my consulting business is, for example, one, I know that the programming model that's being used with athletes at the college and professional level is outdated. So I'm in that position to advise athletics directors, team presidents, here's the new model that we need to have, some social justice in the curriculum. The second area is in training and development. Folks who are in these roles and positions are not equipped and trained at the capacity that we need to be now. There's great people in these roles, but they don't have the backgrounds many times that you guys do, and so I'm able to offer that advice when folks are training people, when they are hiring people in different positions. And then finally, in the area of career transition, having that background in counseling has been very helpful to me as I help professional athletes transition. So all three of these pieces are areas that I've been involved in for other organizations, but it's not enough. And so I see that opportunity because at some point, ultimately, sports is about the business. And that's the thing that I want to leave. Ultimately, it's not like me being in the academy, where the most important thing is graduation rate. And not that it's not important in professional athletics, sports, it is, but it is a business. And so that's the challenge, to get people to take advantage of the opportunity that they have, but understanding that ultimately that's what it's about. So how can you use your skill set, your passion, your love for what you're doing to continue to grow and develop these people against a system that's very different than academia and any other business you'll ever see.
Nothing there.
All right, what would y'all say are some of your biggest challenges in working with professional athletes? Or as a professional athlete?
I can give an example. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Good. And I've worked at every level, from middle school to professional. The biggest challenge is the identity of athletes is underdeveloped as people. So they've grown up being praised, loved, taken care of. Their maturation is not at the level that it should be as people. Because they've been pampered, we've been pampered, moved through the system, loved, put on a pedestal, all of those things they've gone through society, and they have not had the opportunity to develop as people. And that's the biggest challenge. So I always try to use examples of what's happening in the real world when I work with athletes, because they can't see that. They live in a tunnel and encapsulated world where they don't often see reality. And what I'm saying now, these are not bad or negative things, but this is the group of people that you'll be working with. So their reality, you know, I've met with parents at 8th grade combines in this state of Texas. 8th grade that shoe companies put on, where parents are sitting in the audience and they're wanting to talk about the NBA. And when I talk about the NCAA and 16 core courses, they have no clue what I'm talking about. 8th grade, you know, 6'8" 8th graders that are called elite. So imagine what a 7th grader is hearing at his school, in his community, in his family. Everybody has the accolades on these kids, and it doesn't matter the sport. It could be tennis, it could be baseball, it could be track and field. So that's the biggest challenge, using those counseling skills, those social worker skills, to help them see reality and knowing that this is their time. Their prime time is, you know, athletes don't play basketball past 27. I mean, think about that. The average number of years in the NBA is 4.7. In the NFL, it's 3.4.
It's less than 4.
It's less than 4.
It's like 3.
So they have a long period of time to live, to grow up and to mature. So that's the biggest challenge, and there's not one answer to that.
What I see I coached in the NBA recently, and it's so different, but what you just said is not really different because we were arrogant and we had people tell us how great we were, and we had all those things. We didn't have it through social media, that's the difference. But the biggest difference I see is your ability to detect and to discern their sphere of influence. Remember, 20 years ago, it was the coach, it was your parents, and what we see now in the NBA is an entourage of people, even in high school and college. So now you have to figure out who's pulling the trigger, who's influencing that young person, and then you have to kind of understand how to build relationships within that player in that group of sphere of influence. And that's very, very difficult. I was a college coach, NCAA Division I, and I was used to just recruiting. Recruit the coach, right? Recruit the parents. No, I had to recruit the uncle, the brother, the homeboy. So you have all these things going on. It's totally different dynamics that you have to really pay attention to and figure out if you're going to be very effective.
That's great.
Good point.
So I have 2 things. So I guess the first is so many athletes aren't accustomed to failing. Whatever we define as failing. Keep in mind, you know, when you're sitting in a room with 100 or 200 athletes, just using baseball or anything for that matter, they're all the best athletes from wherever they came from. But not everybody in that room can be the best athlete on that team. And so what we're talking about is like having all-star teams sitting in a room knowing that a great percentage of that all-star team is not going to play, or knowing that they're not going to play well. They may hit 125. They've never hit 125 in their life. They were a 400 hitter in high school, or a 500, or one of those other things. So helping them manage what it's like to have new challenges against tougher competition. And that's a really huge challenge for a lot of athletes because they're just used to it, you know, having it handed to them. It feels so easy. And the second piece is about ourselves, and that's how we handle things. All right, and I'll just give you a little personal tidbit here. See, Sid Moncrief over there is a player I used to watch play. He's a player that I was excited to meet today. I was like, man, we get to meet this University of Arkansas guy and this excellent defensive and offensive NBA player, and I got a little giggly. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, I can't wait to go meet him. And I saw him sitting over there, and I was like, this is great, you know? But you know what you don't do? You don't go, give me an autograph, give me a picture, sign this, give me a shirt. All right, I have been in sports because I've done none of those things, ever. Not once. I have never asked for a favor because I'm a professional, and that's how we do it. We don't do that. I can get giggly. When I had lunch with Nolan Ryan, I was giggly. I called my wife up and said I could die now. All right? I mean, he was my favorite baseball player ever growing up. I have one of his cards. My brother traded it for a Nintendo. But that's not causing any pain or anything like that. But you know what I'm saying? So we have to have our boundaries. That's one of the most challenges because until you get used to working with athletes, you're going to get a little giggly. All right, if a player that you respect walks in and you sit down with them, you're going to have feelings about it. It's okay, adjust to it, manage it, but keep yourself working the straight and narrow with your boundaries. And I love the fact that social workers have a very strong ethical code as opposed to other professions that maybe not as much. But social workers absolutely have a strong ethical code. So keep that in mind because as soon as you do that, you've lost all credibility with a player. And the coaches, and the trainers, and the GM, and everybody else, and you are done. All right, and I know I have people that worked with me, I have people that I've worked with that are no longer in sports because they did that. Hey, can I get a couple cars? Can I get this? Can I get a box seat? Can't do those things, okay?
Do you want me to comment, or do you want to move to a different question?
No, go ahead and comment.
Okay, I would reiterate everything that these guys said up here, but I'll speak to the ladies in the room, being a woman in professional sports, if that would be helpful. So, so locker rooms and clubhouses really aren't made for women, you know? Am I right? And they're really not. And
They're
so,
not necessarily made for men either.
Or for men either.
All right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But I do want to be encouraging is that I've not really ran into an issue where, you know, my boss, whether it be the farm director or the GM president, hasn't embraced me and figured that all out for me.
But not literally embraced you.
Yeah, no, not literally, but embrace the fact that, hey, I'm a woman in a man's world in a sense, and so how can we figure out where I can, you know, be professional and, because, you know, you'll have the women reporters will walk in there when they're naked and all that kind of stuff, and for me, one of my biggest things is, I really keep in mind their families, you know, their life. You know, how would I want to be treated? You know, if, you know, my husband was in there changing, would I want a female, you know, in there walking around? No. And so I really try to keep that in the forefront of my mind, and that's one of my techniques of building that relationship with them, is getting to know their wife's name, their kids' names. So each time I'm in town with the Cardinals, I'm like, hey, how's Mackenzie doing? You know, she's pregnant. How's she feeling? How's the little one? Those kind of things, because I think they appreciate you remembered her name, and all of a sudden that barrier, you know, begins to break down. You know that, hey, I'm a human too. I'm a mom. You know, you're a dad. Like, we're just people here, and you know, those kind of things. And so I just want to encourage the women out there that there are teams, not all, but there are teams out there that, you know, will be very supportive of the fact, and it won't even be a thing, it won't even be an issue. And that's the thing that my mentor, Dawn, had taught me, you know, is don't apologize, don't, you know, cower down, whatever, because you're a girl, you have a great skill set. So I just wanted to encourage, you know, that part of it, if that helps at all.
All right, I think we've got a few minutes. We can open it up to the floor. Anybody has a question? No questions for our dynamic panel up here? All right.
So more so toward the baseball realm, I had the privilege of hosting a semi-pro baseball player this summer, and I think that I could see the gap in between the services of the semi-pro maybe not getting as much support and commitment from the teams mental health wise that, you know, the actual single A, double A, triple A professionals got. And I mean, they're young. They're the young ones, the 18-year-old, 19. So I was just curious if you know of any support systems that are in place for those lower levels.
So the question is, the independent ball, the semi-pros. The independent ball is a step below minor leagues, and this is an organization not affiliated with MLB or anything along those lines. It's oftentimes where players will go when they're not quite able to get into the minors, or they've been in the minors and they need to come out, and like the Sugar Land Skeeters and the Houston area, things along those lines. And unfortunately, a lot of the organizations don't have a mechanism in place. Major League Baseball requires that every baseball team, they have to have an EAP. They have to have a mental health service, whereas there isn't such, to my knowledge, there isn't an organization that says that that's required. So I would say that for each of those, if you're aware of those organizations, this might be an opportunity for all of us to say we can offer something. And again, going at it from even saying a volunteer standpoint. And if you're going to do that, another piece of advice, make sure you get liability insurance. All right? 1-800 liability insurance. Make sure you get it because you're not covered and you need to be covered. Okay, we do live in a little bit of a litigious society. For those folks starting out in the field, your liability insurance costs almost nothing. It's very cheap. NESW offers it. I don't even think you have to be a member of NESW to get it, but it's very cheap and you need to have it. And get the legal piece too. So anyway, you weren't asking that question, but again, I'm just saying there's an opportunity there.
I have a question. This is kind of focused on college athletes wanting to be professional athletes, and in my program, which I'm working at, the athletic department, we incorporated a turning pro program, which is kind of focused around it's focused on a competition where they can win an award, but turning pro means more than just turning professional athletes. It's just like turning professional, whether you're going to grad school or whether you're going to like a job or a career. I was just curious, like those terms, but using it directing them towards other career paths, because most of them don't turn professional athletes. Just curious what you guys think about that type of approach and getting them to change their mindset about what they want to do after grad school.
Okay, I'll respond, and then anybody else that would like to. First of all, I want to commend you for having such a program. and there are probably not a lot out there. If you know what's going on in college athletics now, you're aware of the 20-hour rule, right, that they're dealing with in academic support student athlete. And so folks who are in this capacity now are really struggling with their programming and how to fit this in, because their coaches are saying now, okay, we're held to this 20 hours, because what we're hearing student athletes saying about mental wellness. Within that 20 hours is the coach's time, and within that 20 hours is also travel and competition. So we know that the reality to get all these things done, plus the programming that you're talking about in 20 hours is really a squeeze on people in these positions now. If you can have a turning pro or a transition program within your department, that's wonderful and excellent. And I really would like to hear how you pull that off, right? Because for one thing, when you label it turning pro, in most academic institutions, it's kind of may not be as well received with that terminology, right? So that's one thing to think about. I'm not sure what school that you're at. You're at
Stony Brook University.
Okay, so if you're at a Division I in the Power 5,
Yeah.
you might not want to call it that.
True.
Okay, and
Like,
if
you know,
you do, you'll have the coaches maybe buy in, but if you're in D1 and you're in the Power 5, that coach determines what happens with those athletes, especially men's and women's basketball and football. So the other sports, and we don't want to leave them out here, you know, as we're having this conversation, it's mostly about the major sports. That's a different conversation. When you're working with what we call Olympic sports, that's different. Different access, you know, students who are better students, generally speaking, not that the revenue-producing athletes, and I can call it that now, not at the NBA or in college, that's the reality. Their world is very different, football, men's, women's basketball, than all the other sports at the college level. So you can almost do anything you want with all the others. But the access to the time and the target that you really want, but I think the time is right for developing those programs. I've worked with institutions like Syracuse University, like UConn, like Michigan State, like USC, that I've done pilot programs with when I was at the NBA, and they are helping athletes transition. But how you do it and what that curriculum looks like, you know, you've got to have your coach on board, and then it's got to be something that the athletes are going to be interested in. And I'll say one last thing. When I was at UNC years and years ago, they used to bring in someone from the NFL because they had a program, and the kinds of things that they would talk about that interested the athletes are things that you might want to think about. Like, for example, when the presenter came in Carolina, he talked to the players in football about the starting salary of the different positions in the NFL. Then, you know, then he's got their attention. The coach is interested in them, so you're teaching them about the importance of getting a degree, you know, who has the highest salary, it's the offensive linemen, the people who have degrees. So what you present in that turning pro will help you, but great idea.
All right, one more question?
Yeah, I had a question for John and Carrie about how you balance the time between your multiple roles. I know you're the executive director at Phoenix House, and then that's obviously a large responsibility, and then taking on the Astros, and then you said you volunteered for 3 years without being paid. So how did you balance those roles?
Balance? What are you talking about? I mean, so here's the thing. I think at some point I had to make a decision to say how much of this can I do at one time. And so that's why I did the baseball for 12 seasons, which if you want to work in sports, be prepared for 24/7. Be prepared for sports doesn't know what day it is. Sports doesn't care. What is it, the honey badger doesn't care? Sports doesn't care. They don't care that it's Sunday at 9 o'clock or it's your birthday or any of that. Because athletes and the folks that go along with them, they're in their own schedule. So you need to put yourself kind of in that mindset that it's not about having those kinds of boundaries. If you're going to work and be effective in it, especially in professional sports, you've got to be available. And so for 12 years, I was available 24/7. I traveled all the time. It was really tough. And I got to a point where it's like, you know what? I don't think I want to do quite that anymore. So I still do the umpires, and I am an executive director, yes. So I still have that job and everything else. So there's a lot to it. But I guess for me as a social worker, I've always had multiple jobs. And so I don't work 40 hours a week. I've never have. If I work less than 60 hours a week, something's wrong. I must be sick. And so it just depends on how hard you're going to work. And so I'm just being honest about it. If you want a 9 to 5, 40-hour-a-week job, sports isn't for you. I mean, I can tell you that right now. If you want 9 to 5, don't do this. If you're flexible and you're able to go and do extra work and you don't resent phone calls at 1 in the morning, or on a Sunday, or on your birthday, or on your anniversary, that didn't happen, yes it did. So anyway, you're gonna have to be prepared for that. So it's a tough, tough balance. I'm not gonna lie, I'd love to sit up here and give you sunshine and roses about it, but it's not. It's a rough thing to balance. There's a lot of work that goes into it. But if you love it, you're interested in it, and then prepare for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I had a paying job, and I had to work around that, and I didn't have kids, and so that helps me. So if you've got a support system would be very, so now I have a little girl, so my support system is so valuable to me, my parents, you know, and so once I did that through a year, and then you start to build relationships and connections and throughout the sports community. So now I'm, again, so blessed and fortunate that SMU, you know, when I had Peyton, they were like, take off as long as you need, you know, family comes first. And that's kind of their philosophy, that family comes first. I'm like, okay. And then I got lucky again with the Cardinals. Like when I had Peyton, they were like, oh, bring her along anytime you want. We'll set it up, you know, and have her a little crib in the hotel room or whatever you need, you know, like we've got you. And I'm like, what? I have the best jobs ever. And so I do. I brought her to spring training. I've taken her, you know, I fly to St. Louis, so I fly and travel quite a bit, and I, you know, right now she's not in school, I can take her, and if I don't, you know, I've got that great support system. So hopefully you do, and or find one, and that's how I did it. Yeah, and I just was willing to pay the price and sacrifice because I wanted to be in sports. I knew that was my calling, where I should be, and so I sacrificed and worked this other little job and put in a lot of hours.
Right. Well, as I think back on a lot of these responses, a lot of the answers as we're talking about working with athletes, it's the personal touches, it's relating to people, it's building relationships, which is really the core, one of the tenets of our profession in social work. So, you know, to be able to move forward with social work and sports and using some of the experiences and ideas that we've heard from our panel is great. So I'd like to thank y'all for coming and sharing.